Okay, welcome back. And we are continuing our journey through the Republic of Plato. Last class we looked at the problems with the transition from the oligarchic man and the oligarchic regime into the democratic man and the democratic regime. And we saw how people who make money, their absolutely primary goal, will stop at nothing to sell. And to stop at nothing to sell, you have to eliminate the hindrances to sales. Number one hindrance to sale, morality, right? Do I really need this? Is this good for me? These are not questions most salesmen are prepared to deal with. Why? Because the oligarchic regimes of the past have disabled that kind of judgment. How have they disabled it? Because of the central tenet of democratic society, which is the equality of ideas, the equality of values, that everything is the same. Nothing is any better or worse than anything else. So how dare you judge me for whatever my desire is? I should be able to play it out. I should be able to buy on its basis, and there should be no discrimination or recriminations for what I want to do. Oligarchs are interested in maximizing profit as the primary objective, and therefore they will boost this idea of the equality of ideas in order to maximize sales. Fascinatingly, if you look at our own history from the 50s generation that clearly came back from World War II and decided to pursue money, the very next generation, the natural result of this, are children who are deeply frustrated and empty in their lives. And this turns into our 60s radicals, who of course pursue sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Not virtue, right, but maximum pleasure. And it all fits. And this is where the relativism in our schools and everything else, it all starts. Why? To maximize sexual expression without consequences. And you can see this to be one of the chief objectives of people in this country. And so it all fits. Socrates figured this out. And so we see the disabling of reason, the elimination of a guardian element in the soul, and people who are driven by endless consumerism, gripped by the love of change we saw last class. Why? Because when you pursue pleasure, you're perpetually bored, right? It only lasts for a while and then, I don't really enjoy this so much. Fortunately, American society, fortunately in quotes, gives you a new thrill, right? There's something else always around the corner. But then that doesn't really work either. So you switch to something else. Some people wisen up, right? Especially the people who are addicted to physical things like alcohol or drugs. It just doesn't work. You bottom out. And then people have this come to Jesus moment, often literally come to Jesus, where they realize, this isn't working, right? But for other people, it's just not so clear. They continually go through this spinning cycle trying to satisfy themselves, never realizing that if they had followed their, well, I guess at this point it's great-grandmotherly wisdom, right? To pursue the life of virtue, what the church has been teaching the whole time, that without justice you can never possibly be happy, they would realize that the democratic pursuit of valueless life is valueless, okay? And all human behavior, all human action actually entails value because we do things for the sake of other things, from which it follows there is a valuation, right? Thus, goodness is real. It's built in the very nature of human activity. And as we saw with Socrates, it's built into the nature of the soul. So that it doesn't matter if you get everything you could possibly desire. If you don't have justice, you're never going to be happy. Why? Because happiness is not the satisfaction of desire. Happiness is the good of the whole soul. And the desiring part is simply one of three total parts. So if you leave out the reasoning part that seeks to know truth, if you leave out the spirited part, imaginative part that is motivated by the beautiful, how in the world are you going to be happy? It's impossible. You have to satisfy the whole. And our people in this country now, especially our young people, desperately need to know that the pursuit of hedonistic pleasure will not satisfy them before they blow their lives apart through drugs and all these other things, money. Again, not that pleasure is bad. Okay, wine, scotch, these are great things. Not that sex is bad. Sex is fantastic, right? Not that money is bad. Wealth and money and creation of artistic things, these are fantastic things. The issue is they have to be put in the proper priority. The oligarchic man makes money the chief pursuit, okay? The democratic man makes pleasure the chief pursuit. But if you seek virtue, you seek the order of all things. That includes your desires, right? So we don't say that sex is bad in itself. We say sex between people who have the highest possible fidelity, the highest possible warrant of total confidence the other person really loves me, is going to stick by me, right? That's our marital commitment. Deeply satisfying. Right? Deeply satisfying. Wealth, ordered so that your money, when you work hard and you provide for your family, right? You provide for your extended family. You pay your taxes to your city and pay your taxes to your city and your country, right? You help out with, if you're a wealth creator and you have more money, you can help out with various forms of charities. Obviously the church, helping taking care of your friends. And then using your wealth, channeling it into your various gifts to do good for other people. This is a fantastic thing. Riches does not make you bad. Misprioritizing riches, that's what makes you bad. Okay, so never think that we think that money is bad. Money is not bad. Money is fantastic. Sex is not bad. Sex is fantastic. Pleasure is not bad. Wine is not bad. These are Protestant ideas, right? If we just get rid of the sex and the wine, we'll solve the problem. Sure, eliminate humanity. It's a great solution, right? That is not our solution. And as we're going to see tonight, it is not Socrates' solution either. Okay, it's not Socrates' solution either. So, let's then join our fine philosophers in Book 10. Why does the democratic soul and the democratic regime lead into the tyrannical soul and the tyrannical regime? Anyone know the argument? Why does that make sense?
Because of power.
Okay, explain that. Why does power follow from those democratic regimes? You're right. Definitely right. But why is that true? Think about a group of people who have the Acropolis of their soul. Remember the imagery? The Acropolis of their soul has no fine speeches, no character development. It's totally void. No guardian auxiliaries to defend it. Right? It's the honey of the drones. That's all that's there. Why does a person who is like that susceptible to power?
Because eventually the one represents the many.
How so exactly? How does that work?
Many people. A ton of people have a ton of different ideas, but they all are about the same. So then one person comes and he has one idea that represents something that they all agree on, so they follow him.
Yeah, the one person offers a unifying principle. A unifying principle that somehow satisfies desire. It's whatever the latest fad is.
Two wolves and a sheep decide what's for dinner.
Yeah, that's right. That's Ben Franklin, right?
Yeah.
That goes way back. Yes. This is why democracy is a bad principle, right? Yeah, that's right. It's interesting Ben Franklin said that. Yeah, so whatever the latest fad is, do you ever step back and say, how did that become the latest thing? Right? Clearly, somebody made a choice. And everyone else somehow instantly got on board. And we're like, why? It makes no sense. Well, there it is. But there's no discriminating principle in the mind. There's no ability to say, yes, but is this good for me? Does this help my soul achieve human excellence? Is this good for my future if you're a young person, as a future spouse? Right? Is this good for me as a future parent? Is this going to make me a better human being? These are not questions people even bother to ask because they don't believe there is any such thing as betterness. Betterness smacks of elitism, and that's bad. Which, of course, if it's bad, entails there's a difference between what? Good and bad, hence leading to yet another one of those circles we talked about last week. Tom was talking about this, some of the others jumped in. It always leads to an incoherent circle. Clearly true, but these people are not thinking because truth has no habit in their minds. All right, so these people are ripe for tyrannical takeover. As the Romans said, bread and circuses, you control the mob. If you feed them and you entertain them, you can control them. And obviously, we have started to see way too much of that in this country. Where is the old spirit? We want to liberate people so they have the ability to be self-sufficient and make decisions for themselves, based solely on the individual use of their own created gifts. Right? We define human beings by what they do. Not so much anymore. All right. So how are we going to bring all this together? Take a look then with me in Book 10. Let's go to 608B. Page 291. 608B. Oh, do you want to look on Jonathan? All right. For the contest is great, my dear Glaucon, I said, greater than it seems this contest that concerns becoming good or bad. So we mustn't be tempted by honor or money or any ruling office, or for that matter poetry, into thinking that it's worthwhile to neglect justice and the rest of virtue. You can supplant the word poetry in our generation by music, right? Think how many people listen to whatever the musicians say. Like a 15-year-old screaming into a microphone knows the first thing about reality, right? Blows my mind. I join you in saying that, he said, on the basis of what we have gone through, and I suppose anyone else would too. And yet, I said, we haven't gone through the greatest rewards and prizes proposed for virtue. You're like, what? How is that possible? We've gone through 9.5 books. Give us a break. You were speaking of an inconceivable greatness, he said. If there are others greater than those mentioned, what is going on? What that is great could come to pass in a short time, I said. Turning the page. For surely, the whole of time from childhood to old age would be short when compared with all time. Rather, it's nothing at all, he said. What then? Do you suppose that an immortal thing ought to be serious about so short a time and not about all time? I do suppose so, he said, but what do you mean by this? Haven't you perceived, I said, that our soul is immortal and is never destroyed? And he looked me in the face with wonder and said, no, by Zeus, I haven't. Can you say that? If I'm not to do an injustice, I said, and I suppose you can too. It's nothing hard. It is for me, he said, but I would gladly hear from you this thing that isn't hard. You must hear it, I said. Just speak, he said. And then the argument launches. So, what is Socrates doing here? Right? He's contrasting our mortal lives and the role that justice and injustice play there with all time. Why all time? Reason, the soul is immortal. Thus, we cannot consider justice solely in this life. We must consider justice in its wholeness for all time. Sounds like the application of the whole soul justice theory to time itself, doesn't it? So this is an extraordinary thing. If it turns out that the soul is immortal, that massively raises the stakes in what we're talking about. So, I assume you got a chance to read this argument? Maybe. Does anyone know the argument and can represent it to me? How does Socrates argue for the immortality of the soul here? Or shall I ask who actually read this versus those who do not? Well, since I'm not getting a lot of takers on that. Question. What is the sort of thing that can do injury or damage a thing? Is it something that is good for it or something that is bad for it?
Bad.
Presumably the bad. If it were good for it, it would be a benefit. Huh? So only the badness of a thing can actually cause it harm. Question. What is the badness of the soul?
Corruption.
Corruption. And what names do we give to those corrupting things?
Vices.
We have vices. And we have a vice for each area, do we not? So what is the vice with respect to learning? The vice opposed to wisdom? Ignorance, foolhardiness, yeah? All right, the vice with respect to courage? Cowardice. Good. The vice with respect to moderation? Gluttony would be an application very specific to food, yes? More generally, licentiousness, the general license, which then entails gluttony in food, drunkenness in wine, adultery or something in sex. You see what I mean? Which means, by the way, that some of our virtues that we talk about, or vices, end up falling under other categories. At some point, it would be useful for us to go through St. Thomas's account of all this, where it's all laid out in an amazing schema. That'd be really cool, wouldn't it? Okay, but licentiousness, and what's the last virtue? Wisdom? No, we got that already. Ignorance, cowardice.
Justice.
Oh yeah, justice. That's kind of important. And what is the opposite of justice? Injustice, very good. So these are the 4 corrupting influences on the soul. The badness of the soul. Since only the badness of a thing can destroy it or injure it, here's the question. Do these 4 things kill people? Not due to other effects. If you rob a bank and you're racing out, laughing, and the FBI guns you down, oh, you're dead. But we would argue that's the consequences of your action, not the action itself. If you robbed the bank with the ring and got away with it, would that kill you?
Not literally.
Right, not literally, right? That would make you ignorant. You didn't realize the money wasn't going to make you happy. A coward. You steal from other people who hard-earned cash. Clearly licentious. You think you can just help yourself to other people's things. And definitely unjust, right? But what that does is make you worse. If you commit many, many more heinous deeds, does that mean you just suddenly drop over dead? No. What we find in our experience is that bad people just get worse and worse and worse and worse. Darker and darker. Until, if you've seen the pictures on the television, right, of the people who are these serial killer types, you see those interviews and their eyes are dark. You know what I mean? That look of there's just death inside them. But they're not dead. That's the point. So, the badness of the soul, the vices, don't kill the soul. It just makes it worse and worse and worse. So if the goodness of a thing does not destroy a thing, and of course it can't, and the badness of the thing does not destroy a thing, in this case it doesn't, it follows that the thing must then be what? Unkillable. In other words, immortal. Thus, the soul by its very nature is immortal. Descartes has another argument that has a certain similar structure to this. Descartes says that the body consists of many parts. And if you want to kill the body, you have to take the parts apart. At some point when we're taking apart parts, you're dead. Right? However, the soul, being an immaterial thing, not material, does not consist of parts. It is a metaphysical simple. A simple immaterial thing. And because it has no parts, it's not killable. Since the only way to kill a thing is to dismember it, you can't dismember the soul. We use phrases like, well, I have half a mind to whatever. But what would it mean to cut your mind in half? That's meaningless, right? There can't be half of you. You are who you are. That's it, right? Descartes and Popeye mixed together. I am who I am. So that's it. Game over. There's nothing else to say. It follows then that the soul is not killable. Descartes does add one caveat though. Everything in existence is preserved by God's omnipotent power. If God were to pull his omnipotent preservation out from under you, well, then you're history. So Descartes says, philosophically, on that argument, we can't quite establish the immortality of the soul, because we don't know on philosophical grounds exactly what God would do, right? But according to its own nature, the soul appears to be immortal. Okay? Now, we have other reasons for thinking that God never does this to souls, and we can make that argument and develop it further. But what that will ultimately show is the soul is indeed immortal. Yeah?
Like, what is Descartes' proof that there is even a soul at all? Besides, is it just because he was religious, or?
Oh, no. This is purely philosophical argument. Were you in our Descartes class?
No.
Oh, we're going to have to do that one again. This is a fully developed argument. So it's not like I don't know the answer. It's just too much to give you an answer here. But there is one, it's very, very good. But that's just a promissory note. But it's a promissory note that I will fulfill, like all the rest I give you.
Okay.
So yes, we'll do that.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so the soul is immortal. Now, what is Socrates going to do with that? So let's flip the page and see. Go over to 612b, page 295. In the argument, I said, haven't we both cleared away the other parts of the criticism and also not brought in the wages and reputations connected with justice, as you said Hesiod and Homer do. But we found that justice by itself is best for soul itself, and that the soul must do just things, whether it has Gyges' ring or not, and in addition to such a ring, Hades' cap. Hades' cap is a special cap that helps you avoid the gaze of gods. What you say is very true, I said. Then Glaucon, I said, isn't it now, at last, unobjectionable, in addition, also to give back to justice and the rest of virtue the wages in their quantity and in their quality that they procure for the soul from human beings and gods, both while the human being is still alive and when he is dead? That's entirely certain. Then will you give back to me what you borrowed in the argument? What in particular? I gave you the just man's seeming to be unjust and the unjust man just. You both asked for it, even if it weren't possible for this to escape gods and human beings. All the same, it had to be granted for the argument's sake, so that justice itself could be judged as compared with injustice itself. Or don't you remember? All right, now remember back in book 2, we imagined this ring that would enable you to escape the vision of gods and men. And we entirely pushed aside the question of whether that's even possible, so that we could answer the question in and of itself. Is justice good in itself or not? And the entire argument of books 2 through 4 was, oh yeah, you betcha. There's no other possible way to be happy. And justice just is the happiness of the soul. Each part working in a harmonious way for the good of the whole thing, right? Each part minding its own business so that we have that 3-part harmony of the various parts. So it follows then that by granting the point to our interlocutor, saying, okay, we'll grant this conditions of the myth, and we're going to defeat you on your own terms. Having now done that, we're not cheating now with the argument. We now want to take that back and say, now we want to talk about the rewards of justice, not just for what they are in themselves, if you're under the conditions of the myth of the ring, where the just man is getting screwed over, treated like he's unjust, and the unjust man is getting all the rewards of justice. Because that is in reality, right? It is in reality. And as Catholics, you might have been a little suspicious of this, right? Do I really think that some ring could evade the eyes of God Almighty? Oh, maybe Zeus, maybe Athena, maybe Apollo, these pipsqueak gods, right? But compared to the Most High, oh, I don't think so, right? And Hades' cap isn't going to help you either. So God himself cannot be deceived. He cannot be tricked. He sees everything. Nevertheless, we still wanted to answer the argument on its own terms. Why? Because we want to show that our appeal to God is not an appeal to power. We're not on God's side because he's got the biggest battalions, right? We're not on God's side because he's going to give us heaven and all we'll get in this earth is a few pleasures and then go to hell. These Pascalian arguments, right? Stupid. What do? They assume we can't actually solve the problem. So then we play some pragmatic gambler's paradox. Ridiculous. Justice is good in itself. And having established that, then we go back to show how justice is rewarded on every conceivable level. We take back what was granted only for the sake of the argument. And in the first class, did I not use the example of Abraham and Isaac, right? Abraham, take your son Isaac and roast him to crispiness. And I suggested to you, I'd give you a promissory note that we would then address this question. Could God do something that is unjust? Could he command us to do something that is unjust in any form of a sincere way? And how does the book of Hebrews, our Christian text, interpret that actual situation? Well, if some angel or some creature comes down to you and says, if you really love God, we're going to test this now. Eric, we're going to test it. We want you to take baby Jack there, okay, come over to the coffee grinder over there and run him through it, and then have everyone in the class drink it as a sacrifice to me. I bet you we know what Eric's going to say, right? It's going to be filled with expletives, right? That is not going to happen, and you are no messenger of God, right? Because he knows by the nature of the order, this is not possible. But with Abraham and Isaac, how is it different? Anyone know the argument? How is Abraham with Isaac's situation completely different than baby Jack over there?
Providing a sacrifice.
But Abraham didn't know that. That's after the fact. How could Abraham, in good conscience, go up that hill with his son with a knife and a wood.
You knew it was a test?
Well, what's the test then? Is the test, shall I murder my son?
No, what's your faith?
Faith in what, though? Faith has to be in God's revealed content.
Overcoming death.
There's no guarantee that Isaac can overcome death, right? Or is there?
If God had him do it, and God's good,
Circular argument. That's what's in question.
Is it because he believed that in heaven that he would see his son again?
Then couldn't we use that as a justification for any murder we want to commit? I'm sure you'll go to heaven. Don't worry. I'm just getting you there earlier. In fact, I'm doing you a favor. Like this cult in Africa, these 300 people that they found their bodies all over, they starved themselves to death. You know what the argument was? Don't you want to see Jesus sooner? Starve yourself and your children. You'll get there quicker. Bad argument. Terrible, right? Terrible. Yeah, Julia.
He was promised offspring that would number the stars.
Yeah, wasn't Abraham given something extra that none of us are?
Promise, yeah.
Your son, the child of promise, will produce offspring numbering the stars of the sky. How old is Isaac at this point?
little babies.
No, he's older than that. 14 maybe? Does he have a wife?
No.
Do they have any kids? So the answer, faith, is right. But remember, faith must be in an object, something revealed. Well, in Isaac's case, something was revealed. And here's the problem. If Abraham offs his son, how does that get fulfilled? Unless God does what?
There's another baby.
No, it can't be another baby, because it's Isaac. It's not some generic baby.
Right.
Has to come back to Isaac.
Back to Isaac.
Back to
Resurrection.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Resurrection of
It follows, not in the general resurrection at the end of all time. Because he's got to have these kids. In this world, in other words, right here it is, this would not have been a murder. Isaac would have been put to sleep for a while, and he had an ironclad guarantee that God was going to resurrect him. You said, well, then how is it a test? When's that resurrection going to happen? Abraham might never see his son again. You see the difference? Nobody told Eric that his baby's the child of promise, guaranteed to have 1 million kids. If so, if God said that, we cannot do anything to that kid that God would not reverse. Not that that would justify us in doing such things, okay? Okay, so the case of Abraham and Isaac is not an attempt to show that God is greater than morality. That's a total misunderstanding, and the church has long held this. God does not command us to do the unjust. That is impossible. So, with respect to the ring, right, we cannot hide from God and come up with some squirrely answer to try to get rid of the fact that God is just and sees all things. But it's not just God, it's also human beings, right? What do human beings think of justice? So let's look at the argument and take a look at this. All right. He said, I would indeed be doing an injustice if I did not give justice back what was owed. So this is really interesting. Socrates is essentially saying, I demand that we do justice to justice. I will not allow us at the end of this entire argument to commit an injustice against justice. So, well then, I said, this is at D, since they have been judged on justice's behalf, I ask back again the reputation it in fact has among gods and among human beings, and I ask us to agree that it does enjoy such a reputation, so that justice may also carry off the prizes that it gains from seeming, and bestows on its possessors, since it is made clear that it bestows the good things that come from being, and does not deceive those who really take possession of it. We've already established that what justice does in and of itself, what it is, its being, its nature, what it does to the man that has it. He makes him complete and happy. All right? But now we want to talk about not just what it does according to what he is, but how it appears. Not just the goodness of justice, but its beauty, its appearance, how its reputation is. What you ask is only just. Then I said, won't you first give this back? That it doesn't escape the notice of gods, at least, which each of the two men is. All right, so let's make a chart of what Socrates is trying to get at. We want to talk about the penalties and rewards of justice and injustice before the reputations of gods. Whoops. And men. And then in this life and the next. So that's the mission. To showcase these three things and all the possible crossovers that they have. Everyone understand? So we're starting in this life, and now we're talking about gods. All right, good? Okay. So here we go. Then I said, won't you first give this back, that it doesn't escape the notice of gods at least, which each of the two men is? Yes, he said, we shall give that back. And if they don't escape notice, the one would be dear to the gods and the other hateful, as we also agreed at the beginning. That's so. And won't we agree that everything that comes to the man dear to the gods, insofar as it comes from the gods, is the best possible, except, for any necessary evil that was due to him for former mistakes? Most certainly. All right, so what is Socrates here saying about the nature of the divine?
Doesn't escape the gods, whether you do injustice or
Right, so therefore the gods care about what?
justice.
Justice. Now this is huge. Remember, this is 400 years before the Christians. And Socrates is telling us that the gods are just. This is huge, because obviously the pagan gods, not so just. Right, not so just. So Socrates is a little loose here. Sometimes he'll talk about the god, who is the being he actually thinks exists and is perfectly just, versus the gods, Apollo, Zeus, their justice is mixed bag. And sometimes he'll just talk about the gods in more general terms, but say that the divine nature is in fact just. Okay? It's not entirely clear. It's a little bit murky for Socrates at this time. But the principle is that the nature of the divine is just. And of course, this is a massively proto-Christian principle. Right? We absolutely hold this because for us, we understand that God is the supreme good. He cannot but be just because it's his very essence. So what follows from that? Well, thus, next line, it must be assumed in the case of the just man that if he falls into poverty, disease, or any of the other things that seem bad, for him it will end in some good, either in life or even in death. For surely gods, at least, will never neglect the man who is eagerly willing to become just and practicing virtue, likens himself so far as is possible for a human being to a god. So, the gods love people who try to be like them. How so? Like them with respect to virtue, because the nature of the divine is goodness. Now, of course, we have very similar arguments in the New Testament, do we not? For we talk about how St. Paul says we ought to be godly people. What does it mean to be godly? God-like. In what respect? Being omnipotent? I don't think so. Being omniscient? Again, not a chance. But good? Oh yeah. Absolutely. So we see this similar argument. God wants us to be like him in respect that we share that same nature with our Heavenly Father and we exhibit the nature of justice. And this is what Socrates is saying, the same exact thing. The gods like those who seek to emulate them. Okay, did someone have a question? Okay. It's quite likely that such a man isn't neglected by his like. And in the case of the unjust man, mustn't we think the opposite of these things? Very much so. Then such would be some of the prizes from gods to the just man. All right, so notice this, that the just man is going to get the good that's coming to him either in life or even in death. In other words, if he does not get the rewards for virtue in this life, because something is just, he must get it in the next. You say, what is that something? Ready? Here we go. This is a huge principle. The nature of reality is justice. Or to put it another way, justice lies at the bottom of all things. So, it follows then, the universe is just. A justice that is guaranteed by the divine nature. And in the end, everything must get its due. If things do not get sorted out correctly for you in this life, which of course is a big difficulty in many respects, right? You will get it sorted out in the next life. The good must be achieved. And of course, probably your ears are pricking in your mind. You're like, that's exactly what St. Paul says at the end of Romans 8. All things work together for the good to those that love God. Yes. Another proto-Christian principle. Extremely Pauline. Why? Because of the nature of God. That God is good and cares for justice. Socrates at his trial, after he's convicted, he tells the jurors that voted for him for acquittal, he says, I know that the matters of a just man are not a matter of indifference to the gods. Not a matter of indifference, meaning that the gods care about justice. Socrates is absolutely confident of this, even though he's about to be killed. Changes nothing. Yeah.
So did the Greeks or did Socrates believe in an afterlife?
Oh, they all did.
If the soul is immortal, is
Yes.
that linked? That like
Yeah, there has to be an afterlife. I mean, if the body's dead and the soul goes on, it's got to go somewhere.
okay,
Yeah, and Socrates talks about Hades.
and okay, so like the underworld. Hell.
Yeah, we'll talk more about that shortly. We talked about it in this life, then the next, but yes.
Okay.
Yep. It also follows then that if the just man gets his reward in this life or the next by the guarantee of the gods, that the unjust man is going to get what's coming to him. Look at the next lines. Next, top of the next page, 613b. In my opinion, at least, he said, and what does he get from human beings? I said, this is the just man. Or if that which is must be asserted, isn't it this way? Don't the clever unjust men do exactly as do all those in a race, who run well from the lower end of the course, but not from the upper? At the start, they leap sharply away, but end up by becoming ridiculous, and wear their ears on their shoulders, run off uncrowned. But those who are truly runners come to the end, take the prizes, and are crowned. Doesn't it also, for the most part, turn out that way with the just? Toward the end of every action, association, in life, they get a good reputation and bear off the prizes from human beings. So what's he saying here?
You can appear to be just.
Say that one more time, I'm sorry.
People can appear, like appearance,
Right? And then how do they start at the race?
just like everybody else.
Well,
Sprinting,
Sprinting,
wildly
yeah.
wasting their energy.
yeah. Look, unjust people can get away with things for a while. It's quite aggravating to watch it happen. But you've all seen it. Right? But if it keeps going, what happens?
Catch up with them eventually.
It catches up with them eventually. Yep, exactly. So they can race off and get ahead. But this is not a sprint. Right? This is a mega marathon. And at the end, they're huffing and puffing, mile 8, they got 120 to go. Right? I don't know what the race numbers are. A mega marathon, I did use that word, right? Mega, very long. Right? And then at the end, they're just dying on the side of the street, and there's your long distance marathon runner churning ahead. Right? That's the nature of how justice works. So yeah, the unjust man is obviously going to get away with things for a while. But in the end, he's going to get caught. And then his life spirals out of control. Take a look at the next line. Will you then stand for my saying about them what you yourself said about the unjust? For I say that it's precisely the just when they get older, who rule in their city if they wish ruling offices, and marry wherever they wish, and give in marriage to whomever they want. And everything you said about the unjust, I now say about these men. And again about the unjust, I say that most of them, even if they get away unnoticed when they are young, are caught at the end of the race and ridiculed. And when they get old, they are insulted in their wretchedness by foreigners and townsmen. As for being whipped, and the things that you, speaking truly, said are rustic, that they will be racked and burned, suppose that you have also heard from me that they suffer all these things. But, as I say, see if you'll stand for it. Very much say, so, for what you say is just. Well then, I said, would such be the prizes, wages, and gifts coming to the just man while alive from gods and human beings, in addition to those good things that justice itself procured? Indeed they are. So, The unjust man also gets the penalty in this life from both gods and men, right? And of course, we noticed this at the very beginning. I know there was a little bit of a discussion when we were doing the myth of the Ring of Gyges, whether our group of people on the left side of the classroom, the people that wanted to use the ring for all sorts of very nefarious purposes, wouldn't in fact eventually do what? Turn on one another. Highly likely, right? There can be only one? Yeah, indeed. This is a big problem. Injustice wants total power in itself. It can stand no competitors. Right? Remember what Gandalf tried to say to Saruman? Sauron does not share power. That's the reality. So there can be only one, and this will lead to an unending civil war between all the sides until there's only one left, which of course brings us back to the tyrannical soul, doesn't it? So, the unjust man will ultimately get what's coming to him. And if he doesn't get it in this life, it follows necessarily, because the universe is just, that he must get it in the next.
Because sharing would be good, and they're into good, they're into the evil, the corruption.
Yeah, and so the corruption must bear its proper result. This, by the way, strangely, is another argument for the immortality of the soul in reverse. Take people like Hitler. Did they get what was coming to them?
Not yet.
You might say, yeah, because he died. But every single Jewish family, right? Every single person who lost someone and survived, every single person who lost their own life and someone else's life, every one of them have their right to their pound of flesh. So how does him merely dying by his own hand at the end of the war solve those demands?
Because he's in.
It follows that the justice is not complete. And if the universe is just, it follows that it must still come, in which case there has to be divine consequences. Hence, hell follows from a universe that is just, precisely because people do in fact get away with murder in this life. But nobody gets away with murder. Why? Because the universe is just. So no matter what you'd have done, or no matter what people have done to you, where you cannot rectify it, right? We have all kinds of things like that in our lives. Even as Christians, we're told to forgive our enemies. God does not forget. Part of the argument of forgive your enemies is that God has taken notes. Remember what he said in Romans 12, 13, and 14? Justice is mine, I will repay. You worry about forgiveness. I'm coming with a hammer. So, there will be a reckoning. It has to be a reckoning, because justice must be done. Yeah.
So it just seems like Socrates is putting people in either camp, but you could probably do something unjust and be mostly virtuous. And so what kind of flexibility is there to move?
Right. Well, all we're arguing so far is that there must be an afterlife to rectify the lack of justice for people that didn't get the rewards they deserved in this life, or the lack of justice for people who didn't get the penalties that they deserve for their injustices. The question you're asking essentially is, since we've talked about the penalties and rewards of justice in this life before both gods and men, in other words, we've now done half the argument, right? Now we have to switch over to, well, what does it look like in the next life? That's where we have to answer your question. It's a great question. Promissory note, seconds away. Yes?
So if the evidence for the soul being immortal is that it isn't going to be totally destroyed by devices.
Yes.
And so there's this immortality proponent, which I assume is part of what's pushing this idea of the afterlife piece, is like once the person dies, that's the soul is
Soul has to go somewhere.
right?
Yeah.
So then when you're, I guess, the soul doesn't get destroyed though.
Correct.
Right? So I guess it seems like it's a bridge. It seems like there's a jump in the argument.
Is it that there's a jump in the argument, or you don't know where the soul goes yet because we haven't gotten that far? The soul is immortal.
Okay.
The body is not. The body dies. The soul continues. You're like, well, where is it?
But I guess isn't that I guess maybe it's the split between the body and the soul that's tripping me up in the sense of
Well, the body definitely dies, right?
right.
Okay, but the soul doesn't. It follows that when the body dies, the soul does not.
And has to go somewhere.
Yeah.
I
Where, we
guess
don't know yet.
We spend so much time talking about how we can't split the body and soul,
Oh, but we can.
right? But okay.
We can. In Christianity, we do too, right? I mean, we say that if you die today, your soul goes to be with God,
Right.
all right? But that doesn't mean that you're complete as a human person, because your spirit is a soul spirit. It's not like an angel. An angel just is a spirit. Angels don't have souls, because souls are principles that inform material bodies. Angels don't have bodies. Thus, they simply are spirits. Your spirit is a human spirit, meaning it is the form of your body. Thus, a soul form, okay, that's what we call it, a soul, which informs and orders your body. Notice it's your body, not hers. So your soul specifically informs your body, making you into a soul, spirit, body composite. But you are definitely composed of two kinds of stuff. Your humanity is the composite, the wholeness of both of these elements. But it doesn't follow from that they cannot be broken apart.
Right.
But it doesn't mean that you're satisfied as a mere soul spirit, as it were.
Right.
Because you get a new body.
Right, and the church has always said, and the resurrection of the dead is crucial.
Right.
Why? Because we're waiting for our bodies. Okay? So for Christianity, we have to get the body back, because that's the fullness. That's what you're driving at. You're like, well, surely there's got to be a way to get the body back into it. Yes, absolutely right. Okay? Because precisely, we are not Gnostics. Right? We reject the Gnostic division as though somehow this could be a permanent split, or that our goal is to shed the body and become pure spirits, which the doctrines of L. Ron Hubbard and all these people. Okay? You got all these kinds of things. Now, we're going to shortly talk about the details of this. But what we have to do is talk about the afterlife in such a way that it doesn't fracture our humanity, even though death does do us an injury. Because none of us want to die, and we notice that death seems to be attended by quite a lot of misery. Right? It's not good. So, death, not so good. But it doesn't follow from that there's not a solution to this picture. Okay? And it also doesn't follow, because the body and the soul are separated, briefly, that there's not still a natural compositional unity between the soul, spirit, and the body that must ultimately be restored for justice, for your human self to be finished. Okay, but they definitely can be split. We know empirically from near-death experiences, which are very real, by the way. If you haven't read the literature on this, it's astonishing. Okay, clearly the soul, spirit goes on, and many, many times, millions of times, in fact, if you look at the data, it comes back. And the people all have these very similar states of experience when their brain is definitely non-functioning and their soul is flopping around and then comes back, right? Empirical evidence, soul separation of the body. And then, of course, in our theological tradition, we have examples of people who have definitely gone on and then they come back and do things. So, Mary comes back. Jesus was resurrected from the dead. Elijah took off into the chariot of fire. Oh, that's weird, he's gone. And then suddenly Jesus is coming around 600, 700, 800 years later, and guess who's sitting on the mountain talking to him? Moses and Elijah. Well, I guess he's alive, right? So lots of evidence that even though the soul goes on, these people are still around. Okay? So now, how then does Socrates, remember 400 years before, I know I'm switching you back and forth between Christian categories, pagan categories. Remember, the Christian categories fulfill the pagan. I hope you're seeing that over and over, but can still keep the two straight in your minds, okay? So now we're on to death. Any more questions before we move on to the prodigious numbers of rewards before both gods and men in the next life? Yeah?
I'm still confused, why is it necessary to, for your body to be with your soul? Is it because all your decisions that the soul makes involves the body? Is that why you say that?
If you're going to make an absolute claim, the necessity doctrine you're maintaining is too strong. Because they can be separated, it follows it's not necessary. But the good of the human person requires the recomposition of the soul with the body. Because the human person isn't a soul. The human person is not a body. The human person is a soul spirit attached to its body. We are creatures that are composites by nature. We are unities of composition. Angels are pure, simple spirits. The animals, the rocks, all these sorts of things, the vegetables are all material things. We consist of both the material, the body, and the soul spirit, the rational free agency part, as a composite unity. We are a special kind of creation.
How do you know that, like, when you die, it doesn't change, though, like, it becomes like an angelic spirit?
Sure, so far in the argument, okay, for all we know, maybe that could happen, given where we are in pagan argument right now. But if that were to happen, it would seem that we've changed natures. Now, in other words, our true nature is either we've changed natures to become pure spirits, which is what some people think, we become angels, okay? Or that all along we had it wrong. We really were angels trapped in bodies. So that the purpose of this life was to rid ourselves of these stupid bodies and just to ascend. And all the ascension religions, that's what they're trying to achieve. Okay, so we would have to have an argument antecedently to that to show that no. Human nature is in fact a composite. Now, we could do a dandy job of doing that if we were doing a straight Aristotelian type of an argument or the arguments we showed earlier. But the body has always been a part, even in the nature of the virtues, right? Because what is a virtue? A virtue is a rational ordering principle of matter, right? So take courage as a virtue. What does it deal with? It deals with the materiality of fear. Right? Think how many of your virtues are trying to apply a rational principle and put it into matter. Well, if the matter isn't part of what you are, why does it work? It works precisely because you are a composite of the two, and you have habits. Angels don't have habits. Right? And so if the Gnostics are right, if we really are just spirits trapped in bodies, which is what the Scientologists and all these people are claiming, then we shouldn't have any habits. They shouldn't have habits. Right? They are actually possessing their bodies, just like demons. That's the view that they should be advancing. You don't possess your body. You are the composite of your soul, spirit, and your body. It's your body, not by means of possession, of domination, the way the demons do it, but by way of a natural unity of friendship and accord between you, a harmony of the two. See the difference? Yeah. And even in our empirical lived experience, we can see the difference. We are not possessions. Okay, great metaphysical questions, by the way. It's almost like we should have a whole class just on the nature of the mind and the body. But alas, we have plenty of time. Let's surge onward. All right, so what about dead? The multitude and magnitude compared to those that await when they're dead. The gods and the human beings, what do we say about this? And all of a sudden, something weird happens in the story. Do tell, he said, since there aren't many other things that would be more pleasant here at 614b. I will not, however, tell you a story of Alcin, I said, but rather of a strong man, son of Arminius, by race a Pamphylian. Once upon a time, he died in war. And then Socrates continues with this once upon a time story. Page after page, on and on it goes. He gives us a myth. What is going on? We wanted answers, details. What is the afterlife like, Socrates? Come on, give us some details. Instead, he gives us a myth. Well, what do you think? We've been ripped off? The original version, somebody chopped it up and put this stupid myth in here? Why does Socrates give us a myth? The myth of the ring of Gyges. Yeah, you could argue there's a myth-to-myth completion, and some people argue that. On a literary grounds, you could definitely make that kind of a move. But that doesn't solve our problem metaphysically in terms of the nature of justice. So why is Socrates using myth? Ask yourself this question. When this is being said, written, and argued, has Socrates been dead yet? No. Do you know what the afterlife is like? Do you think Socrates did? It's easy to talk about how justice and injustice work in this life because we can see it happening. How would you possibly know the way it is in the next life? Is it any better in our era, Christian era? What have they told you about the afterlife? Well, the streets are made of gold. Really? Wouldn't they tend to get scuffed up? Wouldn't there always be some little angel constantly trying to, boy, these people. We have to give them a special kind of sock shoe so they don't scuff it up. Right? You say, well, maybe that's like an image or a metaphor. Oh, you mean like a myth? You say, yeah, it's supposed to mean that there's no want there. Gold is so available that they can put it on the streets. Oh, I see. Okay, that makes sense. Or maybe the streets are made of gold and there's no want there. The details are not important, are they? What's important is how we characterize the afterlife. Look, if you had never had an experience of a certain kind of thing, and I came and I tried to tell you about it, what would my words refer to?
Things you have experienced.
Right, but you haven't experienced it. So if I say, well, I saw a Swoggle-Wolfmarsh, and I start telling you all about Swoggle-Wolfmarshes, you'd be like, wait a minute, what's a Swoggle-Wolfmarsh? And I'd be like, oh, you've never experienced a Swoggle-Wolfmarsh? You're like, no, we don't know what you're talking about. I'm like, oh, well, that's too bad. End of conversation.
Yeah, so like in math, we call that like a Monte Carlo simulation. You don't have the data, so you create it hypothetically and run the program.
Except here you can't really create the data because you don't have the material to create. It's as though we try to say, what's it like to be a shark? What's it like to be a dolphin? You're like, oh, well, they have sonar. Yeah, they have sonar. And how do you represent sonar to yourself? You represent it visually on a radar type scope. But that's not what it's like to be a dolphin. Okay, they don't represent it on a scope. They feel sonar. You're like, yeah, we don't really have that experience. Correct. You don't know what it's like to be a pit viper. To have heat sensors like that and attack prey solely by the feel of the heat. You don't know what it's like to be a bat. You can't possibly know what it's like to be a bat because you don't have that sensory system. Right? Suppose you tried to explain human experiences of color or other things to your dog. Your dog's just going to look at you. Get nothing here. Right? So if somebody went to the next life, like St. Paul did, remember when he said he came back? He was taken up to the third heaven, he came back. He couldn't utter anything that would be comprehensible. Because we haven't had the experience, so the terms don't refer to anything. It's just Swoggle-Wolfmarsh language. This is the problem. So what we have to do then is use things from this world as, ready, images of the next. Say, well, it's kind of like this. The kingdom of heaven is like a woman who lost a coin, and after a long search, she finally found it. See what Jesus is doing with all these little parables? The kingdom of heaven is like this. The kingdom of heaven is like that. And then our enriched images. Well, the relationship of man to God in the beatific vision is like, it's like the familial order of father and sonship, but it's also like the marital imagery of husband and wife. All at the same time. You're like, well, those are two of the richest experiences that we have. Yes, it's like that. But it's that? No, it's better. But that's the right direction.
Yeah, like the pearl of great price.
You like the pearl of great price. And if you want specifics, this is what St. Paul tells you in Ephesians 1. He calls the kingdom of God, ready, get this, an administration suitable to the fullness of time. You got the content there, the rich color. You're like, what is that supposed to mean? Exactly. Nothing. It works. Great. I'm glad it works, Paul. But what are you talking about? He can't tell you because you haven't been there. Okay? Socrates is in the same situation. So he's not cheating at this point. You understand what I'm trying to tell you? He's not cheating. He doesn't know. He doesn't know. So he does what we do. He uses imagery. In this case, a myth. Everyone understand why he doesn't give us the facts, as it were? All right. Now, what's going on in the myth? Did anyone actually read this? Tell us about the myth. What's going on in this myth?
I know it's like an example of how, like, justice and injustice work. I didn't quite understand like the pictures that he was talking about. Like, there's like 8 rings or something like that, and each ring has something to do with justice.
There is something to do with justice. All right. So, People go into the next realm and they make choices for their next life. Okay? So Socrates is advancing a doctrine of reincarnation. That people in the next life are choosing what they will become. Now, what determines the choice?
Justice or injustice?
Yes, but why? Think about what happens when you commit injustices. When you commit an injustice, what do you try to do to yourself and to others about what you've done? You lie. You tell a story to justify it, right? And you move the needle on good and evil. And then the next time you commit a worse injustice, you move the needle a little bit more and a little bit more. And so things that you and I would find absolutely inconceivable, like cannibalism, right? You can't see that as even conceivable. Some people have moved the needle so far, that's perfectly reasonable to them. But the things that we find reasonable, like jealousy, pride, laziness, right? God thinks that's completely unreasonable. Just like we feel about cannibalism. That's how irrational evil is, you understand? Injustice is always bad, always wrong, never good. But when we commit bad deeds, we tell ourselves a story that, ready, corrupts our minds. Here's the key. Moral vice contaminates your intellect and contributes to intellectual vice. You cannot commit injustices and not corrupt your own understanding. Which means, if you have lived an unjust life in the last life, and then you come into this next world and make a choice, the choice of lives is going to be based on what you just did. Your view of what is great has been corrupted by your vice. Your intellectual life has been damaged by your moral life. St. Paul goes through exactly how this happens in Romans 1. If you want to take a close look, it's phenomenal, okay? So everybody comes into this thing and they make choices for the next life based on their corruptness or goodness of being. And this is why bad people choose what kind of lives? Bad lives. And they think they're great. You know, like worms. Can't wait to be a worm. And you're like, oh, that's not a good idea. Not good. But they're like, oh, but it's great. And you say, why would someone think that's a good life? Look how they're living right now. Right? They're living like animals. So why would they not want to be an animal? You understand? You can't cheat, you understand? Because your mind has been corrupted by what you've done. And people who've lived good lives, good people, see how justice is functioning here? Choose good lives. So justice and injustice are, as Ty said, absolutely essential. Nobody gets away with anything. And then on this basis, they are inserted, technically reinserted, hence the reincarnation, into bodies. Okay, everyone understand? Now, does Socrates know for a fact that it works like this? Nope. Does he know that justice must win out in the end? Does he know that justice and injustice must also be accorded its proper due penalty? Yep.
Yes, one possible representation.
Right, exactly right. Okay? But certain things he knows have to be true. And notice another one that is extraordinary. He knows that the soul must be what? Reconnected to body. Why? Because it's what we are. We're composites, all right? So it's fascinating here. It is so similar to us and yet different in some key factors, right? I mean, we believe in reincarnation if we're strictly strict with the terms, don't we? Again, incarnate, in flesh. Right now, you have a body, you're in the flesh, right? You die, you're ripped out of it, and then you come back at the general resurrection, your body and you are reconnected, reincarnated, right? What's different about our view and this one or some of the Eastern ones? Number one, it happens once for us. For them, it keeps happening and happening and happening and happening. Socrates doesn't see an end point. He doesn't know about that. We do, through revelation. So, understandably, we see it as ending once. We also don't see there's any need to have multiple lives. One is enough, thank you very much, for us to make the fundamental choice between good and evil. But, like Socrates, we also insist that our eternal futures are determined by this choice between justice and injustice. Only it's guaranteed not by some vague principle of this, but by the justice of an omnipotent and omniscient God, which guarantees true justice for everyone. Yes? All right. So Socrates sees that the body is essential to the completion and the punishment of human beings. It's essential to human nature. And he also sees that there must be resurrection, although his form of it's a little murky. But he doesn't have all the data. But I want you to see how astonishing this is. Again, proto-Christian. You see why it was the Platonic philosophers that were becoming Christians in droves once the faith was spread around? St. Augustine was taught by Platonists. He was attracted to them. He's like, oh, the Christians are right. Of course they're right. Right? You remember the C.S. Lewis book? What's that one at the beginning? The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe? And the professor is constantly saying, what are they teaching the kids in the schools these days? And then he says, it's all in Plato. It's all in Plato. Yes, it is all in Plato. It's all here. All right? It's just without the additional elements that we get from Jesus. This is as close as any pagan ever gets to the full picture. And it is absolutely extraordinary. Any questions about the role that it plays, the mission of the body, and and how resurrection is a little bit different, of course, from reincarnation? As Catholics, we don't say we believe in reincarnation because everyone gets this mixed up. I mean, I do because I'm a philosopher. And then I play with them until you figure out what the difference is. Technically, we do believe in reincarnation, but it's only once, and there's a natural unity between soul and spirit. You understand all these things, okay? Body. But the people in the East that have these ideas of a continuing progression until they vanish into nothingness, this is not what we think. Nor do we think that the soul is some immaterial thing that's trapped in a body and just goes from different kinds of bodies all the time. As Altered Carbon, the science fiction program said, different sleeves, and you could just switch bodies. No, 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 no. There has not been a single documented case of a near-death experience where someone came back and inadvertently switched bodies with another person who was having a near-death experience at the same time. Not one. Note that. That is huge, right? That means your soul spirit knows it's home. And it's your body, not his or hers.
It's not a possession.
It's not a possession. It belongs to you in the same way that husbands and wives belong to each other, in the same way that children belong to parents. It's the belonging of persons, not the belonging of things. Your body is not a thing, right? Your body has rights, it has status, it has insight. Think about the impact that would have on so many of our contemporary controversies, like my body, my choice. Your body's not a thing. You don't own it as a slave. It has standing, it has rights. How about your body says to you, hey, you're my soul. Why don't you listen to me? Nobody talks this way, but that's the reality. Yeah.
So if you have the body and the soul, like you were kind of going there, but does the soul maybe outrank the body? Because we talked about...
The soul is the operating rational principle of the body, so reason is housed there, and therefore the body ought to listen to the soul, but only when the soul is making wise choices. When it doesn't, our bodies do rebel. So if we go and live massively promiscuous lives, we get all sorts of terrible sexual diseases, and our body would say to us, how stupid are you? If we get drunk and we get terrible hangovers, your body's like, how stupid are you, right? The body is constantly registering feedback that says to the soul, bad plan. So there is definitely a unity of the two where our bad moral choices damage and impact our bodies, and our bodies let us know.
And yet, if if you were in a situation where, for example, for like we talked about the torture room, right, where your body would have to suffer, but the soul would benefit. The right order would have the soul
That's right.
hardwired to say, "I'm putting you on pause."
That's right, because the body is not the king.
Right.
So yes, here's the key principle. The soul is more important than the body. But it does not follow from that the body is not important. The Gnostics.
Well, that goes back to the soul should be rightly ordered, should be looking out for the good of the whole.
The
with
good of the whole,
recognition that the greater priority-
which includes the body, but does not make the body the highest principle, which is why parents sacrifice their lives for children. Why would you ever give your life up for another person on the contemporary mindset?
Right.
But if you're a parent, you can't, I mean, I guess you could help it. There are some total bastards that are just total cowards. But if there's something happening to your kid, like you see your kid heading for a waterfall, what are you as a parent not going to do to stop that child from going over, right? Or if you have to shove your kid out of the way, you're going to get hit by a car, you're like, bring it on. It's just not possible if you're a decent human being for you not to do that. But you're sacrificing your body. And at that point, your body's in line. It's like, yeah, let's do it. Right? Your children came from your body. The body sees a connection. See, the body has an interest. It's really powerful. Yep. Yeah.
Does the church view Plato and Socrates as kind of like quasi-revelations, or is it just like
It's
really
very,
smart
there
guys?
are some things that Socrates says that seem very, very close.
Yeah.
All right? And Socrates does talk about having a sign, a divine sign. And some people have speculated that the Holy Spirit was involved. Like he says, normally my sign tells me to shut up by means of making me incapable of talking further. So in the middle of a sentence, he suddenly, and just look up at the heavens, unable to talk further. And everyone would be like, oh, okay, and they'd walk away.
It just seems too on the nose.
Right, but then Socrates survives to live another day. But during his trial, he keeps talking and he says, it's weird, my sign is not activated. I'll bet you I'm gonna die now. And he keeps talking. All right, so is he just playing a game with us? Possibly. Yeah, on the other hand, is it possible that there is something divine going on here? It is. So it partly depends on how seriously we take the gift of philosophy that he thought was a gift of the gods to Athens and to the world. And if it really is a divine gift, this skill, and it certainly seems extraordinary, maybe. And some of his insights about the nature of the divine, they're very suggestive, but it does seem that very highly tuned natural reason would be able to figure these things out. Like one of the things he says is, I know the nature of the God is the good, but I don't know his name. So is it Apophis? No. Is it Zeus? No. Is it Athena? No. None of those gods are good. But he had never met the good God. See, he was not aware what was happening in Israel with Moses, where the good God actually gave his name, the I Am. Had Socrates heard that, he'd have been like, of course. But he didn't know. See, that took revelation. Yeah. But Socrates is our intellectual tradition. If you go to Italy, for example, okay, you're going to see all this amazing art, and you're going to see in churches, in sculpture, in paintings, that the church is based on 3 pillars. Judaism, obviously. Paganism. Paganism gets a lot of things wrong, but they have some things right, and we inherit some of that. Okay, and there's lots of ways that happens. But the third pillar is philosophy. And always you see Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle in the sculpture, in the painting, right there. So, yeah, there's something amazing here.
And it's always in threes, isn't it?
There's a lot of 3s. Wonder why. Okay, so let's see the conclusion of the matter. Flip the page over. Or, let's see, where am I? Oh, here we go. 618C. Page 301, 618C. Now, here, my dear Glaucon, is the whole risk for a human being, as it seems. And in this account, each of us must, to the neglect of other studies, above all, see to it that he is a seeker and student of that study by which he might be able to learn and find out who will give him the capacity and the knowledge to distinguish the good and the bad life, and so everywhere and always to choose the better from among those that are possible. He will take into account all the things we have just mentioned, and how, in combination and separately, they affect the virtue of a life. Thus he may know the effects, bad and good, of beauty mixed with poverty or wealth, and accompanied by this or that habit of soul, and the effects of any particular mixture with one another of good and bad birth, private station and ruling office, strength and weakness, facility and difficulty in learning, and all such things that are connected with a soul by nature or are acquired. Now notice there, he's recognizing that people are differently constituted, which means A, he's taken into account the body, and B, he recognizes that different constitutions mean how virtue works is going to be a little bit different. This is a tremendous insight. From all this, he will be able to draw a conclusion and choose, in looking off toward the nature of the soul, between the worse and the better life, calling worse the one that leads it toward becoming more unjust, and better the one that leads it to becoming juster. He will let everything else go, for we have seen that this is the most important choice for him in life and death. He must go to Hades adamantly holding to this opinion, so that he won't be daunted by wealth and such evils there, and rush into tyrannies and other such deeds, by which he would work many irreparable evils, and himself undergo still greater suffering. But rather he will know how always to choose the life between such extremes, and flee the excesses in either direction in this life, so far as is possible, and in all of the next life. For in this way, a human being becomes happiest. And notice there, he talks about the excesses in either way, right? Well, there's your two different vices in Aristotelian golden mean theory. So, how crucial is it to have this knowledge? Let's look at the grand finale at the last line. 621c, page 303. 621c. And thus Glaucon, a tale was saved and not lost, and it could save us if we were persuaded by it, and we shall make a good crossing of the river of Lethe, that's the river of death and memory, and not defile our soul. But if we are persuaded by me, holding that the soul is immortal and capable of bearing all evils and all goods, we shall always keep to the upper road and practice justice with prudence in every way, so that we shall be friends to ourselves and the gods, both while we remain here and when we reap the rewards for it, like the victors who go about gathering in the prizes. And so here and in the 1,000-year journey that we have described, we shall fare well. So the Socratic principle is that we seek to be friends to ourselves and friends to the gods. Friends to ourselves is the internal harmony of all of the parts, right? There's justice, our beloved justice. Friends with the gods is the recognition that justice is a relation not just to ourselves, but to the whole of the universe. Thus, justice does indeed lie at the bottom of all things. It is the fundamental principle. This is why in the medieval cosmology you hear them talk about the harmony of the spheres, the planets, and how they're in some sort of essential harmony, and they call that justice. There's also an essential link, by the way, between justice and music. We'll talk about that someday. Convenient, yeah. Mm-hmm. So what ought we to do then? Well, we ought never to commit an injustice. Don't commit injustices. Don't do it. Bad move. It's never going to make you happy. It's never going to work. Oh, it might work quickly. You'll race out in front and then, right?
This doesn't have anything to do with this class, but
Okay.
can we be friends with angels?
You can form a relationship with your guardian angel, but your guardian angel doesn't tend to talk to you. And you definitely can be friends in the sense that your angel seeks the good for you, and your angel is useful for you. It's not clear that the angel has the same pleasures that you do, the three conditions of friendship: pleasure, utility, and goodness, because what angels are after seems difficult for us to fully grasp. So it's really not entirely clear. It might be better for us to think of our angels, our guardian angels, more like Secret Service agents who are always there to protect us, but they're not really your friends. But once you graduate to the next life and you finally meet, there'll probably be some moments of awkwardness, like, yeah, sorry about that. But once you get through that, right, then there'll probably be friendship. Well, let's hope so. Or they'll finally be free to do whatever they want to do. So I don't think, though, I don't think that we can be friends with angels now in the complete sense.
Like, can I sit down with them in the afterlife and play a game of chess with them?
Yeah, yes, sure. I don't see why not. Yeah, but the problem is right now, I mean, your angel's not likely to play chess with you. I've never heard any saint say, oh yeah, my angel comes down, we play chess all the time. Because that's not the mission. You know, the mission is you're good, and that's what they're consumed with. It's charity, but it's not human affection. We tend to think of human love always in terms of human affection, feelings, and the body, and all hugging people. Angels don't have bodies. They don't have anything like mammalian tendencies or affection. The way C.S. Lewis described it in the Space Trilogy in the book Paralandra, it's a pure light of fiery, absolute charity. Loving your good purely, with none of this other nonsense. Because that's what angels are. So you say they don't even feel toward us like we feel toward our pets? No, because they're not mammals. We have a mammalian attraction to our dogs and our cats. Not to eat them, but furriness and coziness and warmth and cuddliness. All of this we share with we have way more in common with animals than our angels do with us. So, but you can definitely talk to your angel.
Why are we more towards being a soul than animals then?
Well, we have soul spirits that are independent free agency things that animals don't.
But then why are we more closer to animals than angels?
Because we have body and the angels don't have body. We share in common with the animal's body. And with the mammals, we share mammalian bodies. We have less in common with reptiles or spiders.
But do you get what I'm trying to say?
I mean, it sounds like you're trying to say we ought to have something in common with the animals because we share body. And we ought to have something in common with the angels because we share rationality. And I agree with that. But the kind of rationality, what the philosophers call intuition, that the angels have, is different from ours. Because their time, remember, they see everything in one intuition. In one moment, they see the complete argument. We have to get data and evidence and slowly work our way. So we work from the parts up to the whole and try to get the general rule. The angels know the whole down the bottom. It's completely different. Yeah. So yes, we are free. Yes, we're rational and they're rational. But our rationalities function very differently. And our rationalities are essentially built into our sensory and imaginative systems. And the angels, they have no sensory systems at all. So when we talked about what it is like to be a bat, what is it like to be an angel? Totally different kind of experience. But are they free moral agents or they were at the beginning? Yes. Are there other points of commonality? Probably. But like I'm saying, I think we know a lot more about our points of commonality with cats and dogs than we do about our angels. Our angels surely know way more about their points of compatibility to us because they know massive amounts about human nature in general and massive amounts about us in particular because they've been dealing with us the whole time. But again, it's not that we're their pets. I think the Secret Service example is the best example that I can think of. All right, so don't commit injustices. And if you do commit injustices, now moving again back to Catholicism and our revelation, we have the astonishing splendor of divine grace. So, the church emphasizes that if you've done something wrong, go to confession. And if you're a little leery about this, stop being leery and just do it. It's really the best plan. My RCI students, first time they have to do a confession, they're all sitting there sweating it, Yeah. Of course you're sweating it. It's very nerve-wracking the first time you do this. But once you've done it, you're like, oh, I survived. Yeah, the soul does not die from going to confession. We could have proven that from this argument, right? In fact, it's better. And then you get relieved when you realize that God actually loves you and wants to restore you. So the forgiveness of God's grace is justice, but not negatively by taking it out in your hide, but restoratively by making you actually good. And that's the best thing. So envelop yourself in divine grace, choose to live just lives, and these principles of Socrates will find their fulfillment, and then the full add-on that we get from Christianity. All right? Bravo, well done, class. Well done. Can't wait to see what we do next. But that concludes our series.